Very good. Okay, so it is a great joy and privilege to have with us today José Antonio Dìaz Luque. Very dignified name you have, José. And he's done it all. He's been in the field. He's worked for organizations. He's managed organizations. He's started organizations. He's done research. He's co-authored papers. He's authored papers. But most importantly, at least to me, he's a great friend to Phoenix Landing now and to parrots, both in the wild and in captivity. And so thank you, José, for being here today. It's so good to have you as part of our network of parrot-loving people. You have so much to bring to the table. And I'm going to go off video now and let you take it away. And thank you again. We'll be back for questions and answers at the end.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody at Phoenix Landing Foundation for making this possible. And thank you for everybody who decided to join this this presentation, this talk about what wild parrots eat in the wild and the conservation implications of their diet and their interaction with trees and plants in general. I'm going to share my screen. Please, if somebody can assure me that
yes, I can see. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so as I was explaining, we're going to be talking about what wild parrots eat and why. And the why, it's quite limited because that's the why we think right now. But it's very likely that in a few years from now, especially with some species, we will know much better about what they actually eat in the wild in order to understand the why. But even now, we know there is some conservation, there are big conservation implications about what wild parrots eat most of the species that we study. So I'm going to be presenting here a series of research. In most of them, I'm proud to be able to participate, but in all others, I'm not an author or a co-author of those papers. But I think this science is pretty good, and I definitely think that helps us to understand which are the conservation implications of wild parrots diet. So when we talk about wild parrots diet, there's clearly something it comes to our mind. So for example, macaws, everybody who has a macaw in all kind of books that you read or forums, etc., it tells you that they eat nuts. They actually are not a specialist. But the fact that they are not a specialist, it doesn't mean that they don't eat other food resources from the wild. They don't become from palms. Other things comes to us, like lorikeets eat flowers or actually nectar. And that's true. They eat nectar, and it's an important part of their diet, like nuts are for macaws. But again, that doesn't mean that they can survive just by eating nectar from flowers. They can go ahead, like we are humans can go ahead without having a good diet, but that doesn't mean that it's exactly what they should be eating entirely. And also, it's known that some parrot species, like the Kia in New Zealand, they attack sheep to eat meat. That's definitely not the big part of their diet, but that's something they do. And if they do it, it's definitely something we should consider, especially for those people or institutions who has Dìaz in captivity. They should understand better how much protein it should be added to their diet. But the reality is that a lot of parrot species, like this red-fronted macaw in Bolivia, which is a critical endangered species and endemic from Bolivia, one of the most important part of the diet comes from crops. And the fact that come from crops, it doesn't mean that since, before humans were settled on this area of Bolivia, they were not eating crops, because actually crops were not part of their diet. But right now, crops are really impacting their diet. And it's important to understand the consequence of that, not just related with the damage that they can create on those crops from humans, but also on which are the nutritional implications for those parrots to be filling those gaps that they don't have anymore. They don't have some food resources on areas where the crops are growing, and they have only one possibility, which is to attack those crops and eat peanuts or corn in this case. If we go about understanding the major threats of parrots in the wild, we can clearly see that parrots, if we see the 5 biggest threats that are considered for parrots in the wild, that's a study we published in 2017. From the first 5, 3 of them are clearly related with habitat loss. The reasons is different. Agriculture has a massive impact. A lot of land are being cleared for agriculture on the habitats where parrots occurs, and that's having an implication of their diet. There's also logging, which basically is selectively cutting specific trees that have an important, they are important for human consumption, like building furnitures or constructing houses, etc. That's definitely something that impact parrots. There are some trees that are value for humans, but they also have they are also a critical component of their diets in the wild. And at the end, there are nervous system modifications for a lot of different reasons that humans in cities or in the field, we develop different structures that modify the habitats, and that has a massive impact also on the food availability that parrots can obtain. So if we start to go specifically about parrots, we know there are so many parrot species. There are about 400 parrot species in the wild, and it's clearly different what is the diet from a macaw compared to a mountain parakeet or cliff parakeet in Bolivia with other type of parakeets. They are different species, and they also forage on different habitats, and definitely that impact their diet. So if we go specifically for those species that I mentioned before, we can see that these species, there's 9 species that we studied. They had, they use trees, shrubs, climbers plant, wild herbs, and culture herbs. But they use them on different ways. So for example, we can see that some of the species that we studied, they didn't use culture herbs. But for other ones, like the canary wing parakeet, the culture herbs have a massive, they actually use them a lot. For example, we go to trees for red-fronted macaws. We can see trees are an important food resource, but that's also related with how they, what is their behavior in the wild. So macaws, they don't normally go in big flocks, and when you don't go in a big flock, you should be careful about predators more than if you actually go in big flocks, because big flocks means more eyes, and more eyes means more capability to actually understand if a predator comes. So for a species or for big species, we can clearly see that the reason they go to the ground, it's actually decreased. And even into those type of plants, we also see that they eat seeds, fruits, flowers, bark. For some species, bark, it's very important, and I'm pretty sure very few people are giving bark to the parrots in captivity, which it's okay, in fact, because we don't know what we are actually giving to a parrot if we take a bark from a tree in our neighborhood. But it's definitely an important part of their diet, but also invertebrates that also being studied, that for some species like cliff parakeets or the caribbean parakeets, they are an important part of their diet as well. But including all those like food items that they use, we also found out that they act as dispersers of those food. For years, since parrots were started to be studied, everybody thought that parrots were just seed predators. And it's true, they are seed predators, But it is also something very important to recognize, which is the role, the ecological role they have in the habitat about dispersing seeds. So me, as a part of a group of researchers, we were studying for years already, almost 10 years, the ecological role of parrots about dispersing seeds in the wild. So if we go back to more specifically to macaws, we can see this study done in 2018, where they were basically analyzing the diet of neotropical parrots. They found out that there are some species where we have a lot of data, like a lot of studies, like green-winged macaws or like scarlet macaws. So we understand a lot the diet. You can see that as much as we understand the diet, as more likely bark or nectar or stem actually start to show up on the diet. And that's been that we actually know better what those parrots eat. So for example, for another issues, hyacinthus or for hyacinth macaw, we already know that this is not true. I mean, for the time this study was done, that's okay. But this study didn't use other data that is published, and we know that they also eat flowers and fruits. But the fact that they have different, they consume different food items, it tells us how important it's for them to have an actual good quality of habitat. So as more intact is the habitat for them, it's more likely they're going to be able to find the actual food resources that they need to collect from the wild. If we go specifically to the case of blue-throated macaws, which is a species that is critically endangered and endemic from Bolivia as well, and I was working with them for almost 14 years, we can see that despite there is very few studies, it's already studied that flowers have a massive importance on their food diet, especially during the breeding season. And if we go, for example, to see a picture of the species, we can clearly see, compared to a great green macaw, that blue-throated macaws has a different bill shape than great green macaws. And the reason about the bill shape, we believe it's actually because the diet they have. There is no reason for you to have a pointy bill if you are going to be cracking like massive seeds like great green macaws or hyacinth macaws does. So they also have a pointy bill like macaws have, but you can clearly see the difference with this blue-throated macaw. So we are still understanding which are the specific food items that are making a difference on the actual breeding capacity of those species. So we know that blue-throated macaws use mainly motaku nuts as like the 70% of their diet is component by motaku nuts. But we also know that those flowers at the breeding season, they eat them a lot, just at the breeding season. So if those flowers are not available for the species, we believe that's where we need to study more, that those food items can limit the reproductive capacity of the species in the wild. Something that it's also pretty common in captivity, and we studied kind of trying to understand the reason parrot does it, it's actually the frequency of the food wasting. Food wasting becomes kind of a nightmare for a lot of parrot owners. You prepare this beautiful dish with a lot of food, and you parrot basically, remove everything from the top to get to something he or she got excited at the bottom of the feeder. That is something that for us, it can be a nightmare, but it's part of a natural behavior they have. And this natural behavior has ecological implications, not just for parrots, for the trees and plants where they forage, but also for a lot of species that benefit from this behavior. So we did a study collecting data mostly from South America, but we also include data from the Caribbean and populations in South Spain and Madrid, also in Africa and Australia, and some in South Asia. mostly 103 bird species from 38 genus, which is important. Genus are important to include a different genus on the studies, because clearly different genus have different behaviors about how they eat in the wild and about which food items they collect from the wild. And there was a massive involvement of plant species, 336 plant species from 80 families. Most than 30% of the species of parrots were involved on the study. We compare data from wild birds and captive birds, and we include a lot of different species from lovebirds to macaws. Basically, what we can see on the study, I'm going to be showing a lot of data. I'm not trying for you to get crazy about data, but I just want for you to understand that this is science-based, and I'm going to be kind of telling you what is the easiest understanding of this data that I'm going to be showing. So we can clearly see that most of the observations say that parrots waste food. So in the wild, they could be considered quite inefficient on the way they consume fruit. But there is also something important to understand here, and is that most parrots, when they forage in the wild, they go to trees or they go to plants where food availability is big. That means that what they actually do is act kind of as gardeners of the forest, because what they do is to actually decrease the amount of food available on those trees, and that's bringing benefit to the quality of the food that they are leaving on those trees. So if you can see, most of the food they eat on those observations are unripe food items. Unripe food items means that if parrots remove most of the unripe fruits from the trees, the fruits that are left of the tree will leave all the energy and all the resources to make those left fruits or seeds better, big shape, better quality, and that has beneficial for the propagation of those trees or plants in the wild. If we go also to the aspect of how many of those plants were native and exotic, we can see that most of the trees they waste, most of the plants they waste are exotic. And that has something related with their cultural knowledge about how those fruits are eaten. So if you give something to your parrot in captivity, some of them are, good enough to understand how this can be eaten, but I'm sure you saw very often how your parrot struggle about how to open a new nut, or like how to eat a new food item that you put in captivity. There's something cultural on that. When you are on a flock and you can see other parrots eating, then you can copy the behavior and then you can extract the food item from those food. But if you don't have nothing, if you don't have any in your flock that actually know how to eat food resources, or it's the first time or the very first time that you actually try to take the fruit or the seed from this tree, it's definitely going to be something difficult for you. So the fact that they actually waste food, that brings a massive opportunity for those animals that have no capacity to access to the tree and to collect the food item directly from the tree. Like rodents, they don't have it. Like tapirs, they don't have it. So they actually bring a lot of opportunities from a lot of animals that they are living in the ground, mostly mammals and reptiles. Something that is also well studied right now, and it's something that a lot of you know about, is the fact that parrots, at least some species, they eat clay in the wild. At first, and for so long, that was thought that the reason of this behavior, it was thought that it was just a risk, kind of to neutralize the plants, that toxic plants or foods, the items that they were eating in the wild. So the clay was gonna help them to neutralize these toxins. But the reality is that people like Donald Brightsmith, which is a very important researcher with parrots and has a long-term collaboration process with Phoenix Landing Foundation already, they and try to understand if that was really the case. And what they figure out is that it was not really something related with toxins, and it was mostly related, it's actually related with sodium. Basically, you can see all these parrot species from the Peruvian Amazon, and you can see that most parrots that they consume palm, either fiber or leaf or trunk, they actually, if they use clay, they don't use palm. So for example, we can see a species like the black-leg parrot, they mostly take the sodium from the palm and they don't take the sodium from the clay. But all the species like the chestnut from the macaw, they use very little palms and they prefer to use clay. So at the end, that's a decision, not just on a species, on the individual, how they feel comfortable. Eating clay, it's far away more faster than eating something from a plant, because you have plenty of availability on a certain space. You don't need to move around a tree, but you need to feel comfortable landing on the ground. And that's something that it's not just related with the species, it's also related with the individual. And I'm pretty sure you saw how different parrots in captivity behave different in terms of how they take food resources from a feeder. Not just even from the ground, from the bottom of the cage. I saw parrots, they never go to the bottom of the cage, and that's fine. That's the way they behave about the food resource that they have available. So you can see clearly here that parrot has somehow a capability to understand from those leaf and trunk that they don't use, the sodium content, it's almost nothing compared to the actual ones that they use. So they go directly to those leaf, trunk, and fiber that they know they have the higher sodium content. So something that I was mentioning before is that we also kind of started to think, okay, parrots are amazing birds and they are beautiful and all of that, but it's every time you hear about why a species need to be conserved, there is kind of an ecological reason. There is there's an impact that those species have positive in the wild, in nature, and that's a massive reason about why those species need to be preserved. So, for example, if we hear about tapirs, we all know, or if you search a little bit in Google, you will realize that tapirs has a massive, this has a very important. They're very important on restoring habitat. They disperse a lot of seeds. Same for toucans. But for parrot, it was like, well, they're just beautiful. Well, that's not enough. At least for us, that wasn't enough. And we wanted to actually see if they were actually having a very important ecological role on their ecosystem, in order to show that they just should not be conserving the wild because they're beauty. It's also because they have a very critical ecological role. And that's what we found out, and I'm going to be presenting to you. So you can see on this picture how parrots, some of them on a flock, like red-fronted macaws, they carry on food on their bills. The fact that they carry on food to eat them somewhere else, that means that they are actually acting as seed or fruit dispersers. You can also see like these lyre macaws, which is an endangered species from Brazil, endemic from the Caatinga forest. They actually has a liqueur palm, like a bunch of fruits from the liqueur palm, and this bird is carrying these 10 fruits on his bill to eat somewhere else. But the reality is that some of those seeds, they are going to be able to be transported to another point where very likely they're going to be converted in a new palm tree. So we were studying a lot of different species from parrots, most of them in Bolivia. And we could see that for a lot of species, there were dispersion events, but most of them occurs on short distance. Short distance dispersion events doesn't mean that they are bad quality. They are okay, but of course, as far away they disperse seeds or fruits, as better it's for the genetic of those plants population. So here you can see that some of those species, actually the blue-throated macaw, we detect dispersion events for minimum distance of 1,200 meters. When I talk about minimum distance, means that this is the farther we saw the bird flying in a straight distance, in a straight line, with binoculars. And we measured the distance, and that was the minimum. But we didn't see where those fruits or seeds were dropped. So very likely, those fruits were dropped. Most of these fruits and seeds, they were dropped on a longer distance than what we actually have. The fact that blue-throated macaws also are critical endangered means that we have a critical endangered bird that is having a very important ecological role on their environment, but this parrot, it's getting extinct. So if this parrot get extinct, we're not just losing a beautiful bird, we're losing a very important part of the puzzle on this ecosystem. So you can clearly see how the behavior work. Parrot take the fruit because they are social. They try to stolen food from others. That's happening a lot in the wild. So the parrot decide to fly to another tree, and then this fruit is dropped under the tree. Blue-throated macaws, they don't crack nut. So they actually take the pulp of the nut, which is not affecting the germination success of the palm. So we started to study how we could find small palm trees growing, and if there was some relation with perching trees. Perching trees means trees that are used by parrots to perch, and where we could see seeds being dropped by macaws or other parrots. We didn't see who dropped those seeds, but about 5-6 different parrot species eat those fruits. Palms normally produce a very tasty pulp to make animals to eat those pulps and remove the pulp from the nut, and that actually help the nut to germinate to success. So you can see there was a lot of trees, immature monocule palms, that they were not correlated with perching trees, but a lot of them, they were correlated with perching trees. So going directly to this table, we can clearly see that the animals that they consume monocule nuts, cattle are one of the species that eat the monocule palm, but they don't go to perching trees because perching trees are dead trees. They normally go to eat those nuts on areas where there is shade. So in areas where there is shade is where you normally find small palms coming from cattle. We also see macaws, and we also saw other animals. But in reality, if we see macaws are far away the species that are most common on those habitats compared to monkeys or compared to other animals. And the dispersing events that they do, it's clearly higher than in cattle. Another thing that cattle does, and almost nothing compared to monkeys and to other species, they are not really dispersing seeds of this monocule palm. If we go back to cattle, because the way cattle are being managed, normally cattle spend half of their day on closed enclosures, and that's where they drop their feces, and that's where the nuts can be fine. So that's mean that they are dispersing the nuts, yes, but they are dispersing the nuts on areas where there will be never a new forest growing, because every day you have hundreds of cows getting into those enclosures, and the probability for those palms to success is almost zero. If we focus specific on the 3 macaw species that can be found on this specific area, we can see that the most common is the chestnut-fronted macaw. But if we go to, again, to critical endangered macaw, like the blue-throated macaw, most of the seeds that they ate are dispersed. So that shows, again, the importance of macaws dispersing seeds. In terms of distance, the same. Most of the dispersing distance of those nuts were less than 100 meters, but we had very big distance, like almost 1,250 meters, specifically for blue-throated macaws. Now we keep studying macaws, and we found out that Liam macaws on this picture, there was a lot of small drops coming from them, and that that it was found that was the birds were they were releasing their feces while flying, and all of these red or pink dots were actually kind of part of the pulp and the seeds from a cactus that is pretty well known on this area, and it's well distributed whole the Caatinga forest. It's not an endangered cactus, but we were trying to understand the consequence of parrots dispersing seeds into the feces. So we studied the group that I didn't participate on this paper, but the group that I'm working with, they studied parrots in Peru and in different parts of Brazil and Argentina, actually 4 different parrots. And you can clearly see that the percentage of those feces with seeds come from the 24% to the 49% with Lear macaws. So the 49%, it's almost that half of the feces that they could collect had seeds inside. So it's not that they're just dispersing because they are taking the nut and dropping it somewhere else. They are actually doing a digestion process, and those seeds are part of their feces, and those seeds could have a germination success after going throughout the body of the parrot. That's something we wanted to study, and we found out that the viable seeds that were tested for some species or sample size was very limited, like 20 seeds or 1 seed. So really this data doesn't show anything, but from those ones that we had a bigger sample size, we could see that for 2 cactus, 49% of one species of those seeds were viable. So they were able to grow a new cactus. And from other species, 92%, almost 93% of the seeds were okay for generating a new cactus. So basically what we are saying here is that this species of macaws is being critical for this cactus to survive in the wild, to be widespread for all over the area where those parrots occurs. And if we lose this parrot species forever because it become extinct, we are losing very likely one of the principal dispersers of the seeds of those two cactus. Then the group went back to Chile to understand a phenomenon that is happening South Chile in the Patagonia. There is a very difficult situation going on with the Austral parakeet and a specific food resource that they eat from Araucaria araucana. So Araucaria araucana is pretty valuable for human consumption. So humans are massively collecting those seeds, and they are being on this area, and they are being a big competitor for parrots be able to collect their food resource from the wild. So what happened is that those parakeets, they actually eat partially, most of them eat partially the seeds. So we wanted to understand if those seeds that were partially consumed, they still maintain their germination capability. And the study shows that the hand-cut seeds, they actually have a germinated success bigger, but the intact seeds has less germination success than the partially eaten seeds from parrots, especially during the first days after showing. So again, the fact that those seeds are being partially predated by parrots, it doesn't mean that those seeds are losing their germination capability. Parrots are collecting this food resource that is critical for them, but they are also acting as dispersers of those partially predated seeds, and they are giving a new opportunity for those seeds to generate a new tree. If humans, we remove seeds from the wild, those seeds will not have any capacity to generate a new tree, because basically we're taking them out of the ecosystem for human consumption. Same thing happens for cockatoos in Australia. The group got kind of crazy trying to understand all this behavior from all different kind of parrots all over the world. And that was found also that cockatoos do the same. They disperse a lot of seeds from araucarias in Australia. There is no studies yet about the germination success of those partially predated seeds from cockatoos in Australia, but the fact that in Austral parakeets, we found that partially predated seeds had a good germination success, that means that that's very likely the case for cockatoos, and at least we presume that this is going to be what we will find. And again, same thing about the frequency and the dispersion. A lot of dispersion events by cockatoos and araucaria trees in Australia. We went back to Bolivia and we keep studying something that is being kind of established at the science world, which is the fact that there are some species of palms that they had a megafauna that is extinct. They don't occur anymore, and they were a lot of scientists assume that those species that are extinct now, they were the most important dispersers from those palm species. So that means that basically those palm species lost their most important dispersers. We really didn't believe that. We already knew there were massive information showing that parrot act as important dispersers of palms, and we wanted to understand a little bit more the case. So we install camera traps from a lot of different places in Bolivia and Brazil, and we record a lot of different animals, including other birds like agoutis, monkeys, tapirs, even Maine wolves eating different palms from the ground, and arboreal porcupines as well. So you can see here 6 different palm species and a lot of different bird orders and others from mammals, etc. And you can see that in most of them, specifically on 3 of them, parrots were clearly the most important group dispersing the nuts from those palm species. So that shows that the fact that parrots occurs, it shows that very likely those palms were not depending on megafauna, extinct megafauna, to actually keep surviving as a species in nature. Parrots were part of those dispersers from those species when those megafauna were in this planet. And when this megafauna got extinct, parrots just keep doing exactly what they need to do. So parrots not only act as primary, they're mostly primary dispersers, which means that they are the first animals that collect the food from the trees and move it somewhere else where other animals can find it and keep moving it. That's happened, for example, with tapirs. If macaws try to take a nut from a palm tree and they eat a nut and they drop it, then the tapir can come below the tree, collect the nut and move it somewhere else. So they are as a critical group of animals doing primary dispersing events for the secondary species to be able to continue the ecological process of dispersing seeds. Again, another araucaria tree in Brazil with the red spectacle Amazon, a very poorly studied Amazon species from Brazil. And the same thing, jays are known as dispersers of the seeds, but parrots are far away most important dispersers for the seeds. So we keep finding the same situation everywhere where we go as scientists to study how parrots interact with trees or food resources in the wild. Their ecological role keeps repeating and repeating forever. And that's something that shows us that that's not just a specific behavior happening with a specific species or in a specific area. It's something that they have it as part of them as a species. Same thing, parrots, this group of researchers, they were understanding how was the germination success of the partially predated seeds by parrots, by rodents, by those ones that were unknown if they were actually parrots or rodents or both, or Lepidoptera, which is an insect that attacked the seeds. So you can see the insects, they clearly decrease the germination success. The partially predated has a quite good germination success, but not as good as the undamaged seeds, but pretty close, which means that in a healthy tree population, this difference of germination success, it's not really gonna create any big damage. Those trees can clearly keep going by giving those seeds to the parrots and be able to guarantee that those seeds are gonna be moved somewhere else. And that's basically the strategy. You need to produce something that is tasty so the parrot can take it, move it somewhere else, leave it, and even doing that, you are guaranteeing a very good germination success. Another important thing related with Lepidoptera is the fact that normally insect attack seeds where there are a big amount of seeds together. And that's happened, for example, where tapirs do like release the seeds. They normally mark their territory with their feces. And the way the tapirs do like this process is by having an area where you can find thousands of seeds being dispersed by tapirs. That's good, but at the same time, it's not good because it's like an ecological trap for those seeds. And because there is a lot of seeds together, the probability for those seeds to be attacked by insects like Lepidoptera, it's pretty high because insects wants to go to trees, to seeds where there is a very big amount of them. So it's easy for them to predate them because that's basically what they do. They predate the seed. So again, by parrots moving seeds from a lot of different areas, the probability to find a perching tree with a massive amount of seeds below, it's really low. So the probability for those seeds dispersed by parrots being attacked by Lepidoptera, it's also very low. Then we went back focusing on hyacinth macaws and lyre macaws. We focused on hyacinth macaws in Brazil, focus on the population where Neiva Guedes it's working, and also on a population in Bolivia where I was working with other people from Bolivia and other researchers. We also include data from a population of hyacinth at the Cerrado forest and from lyre macaws at the Caatinga bioma. We didn't include data from this population of hyacinth that is being known, they occur in the Amazon. That's because we were not able to get anybody there or contact somebody that could provide the data from there. But basically, we saw exactly the same thing. A lot of different dispersion events from a lot of different food resources. And here is something very interesting. Hyacinth macaws on two palm species, one here and another one here, Atalea barriensis and Atalea ecleri, they are able to disperse seeds that are being burned by fires before. They actually go to the ground and select those seeds because, like you can imagine, for a macaw, you have predators, it's more easy and more it's safe to go in the ground on an area that is clean. That's what happened when a fire comes to the grass. There's no grass for a few months until the next raining season, and they can actually go and grab those fruits from the ground and fly somewhere else. So it's not that doesn't mean that fires are good for hyacinths, but that means that they are, intelligent and they can actually get a benefit out of a negative impact that it's happening on their wild. And here you can also see that most of these seeds are predated, but inside those shells, you can see partially predated nuts. So something we're still not understanding because we didn't do the lab test, it's what is the germination success of those partially predated seeds by macaws, hyacinths and lyre macaws on those nuts that they predate. Again, you can see here a lot of different families, but mostly palms that they use from the wild, especially hyacinths and a very different diet for lyre macaws on the habitat they have. Same thing about the dispersion events. Most of the dispersion events are a short distance, but we all have very long dispersion events on hyacinth macaws on different nuts. We also saw tertiary dispersion events on hyacinth macaws, which is the first documented case of tertiary dispersion event on a macaw ever. What's mean a tertiary dispersion event? It means that parrots eat seeds. So first of all, they go to the palm, they collect the nut from the palm, they fly to a perching tree, they eat the nut, they drop what they didn't like from the nut. This is collected by, on this case, by chicks that were on the same farm where the hyacinths were. Chicks took those partially predated nuts and eat them and took them to the enclosure. And at the enclosure, at the fences of the sheep, or even like the sheep just vomit what they had on their mouth, then the hyacinths went back to the sheep's enclosure and collect those partially predated nuts and finish to eat them again on a perching tree. So on these interactions, hyacinths are acting as a tertiary seed dispersers of those nuts that they were first dispersing as a primary disperser. Same for lyre macaws, keep repeating and repeating forever. Short distance mostly, which makes a lot of sense. If you are a parrot, you don't need to fly a kilometer to eat a food. You just need to fly to another tree where the other parrots from the flock don't try to eat your food. Okay. Now we're going to talk, later we're going to talk about something related with how palms are being boiled, like how their leaves are, how the food is located. And we already know that this way of being a structure, it's support for animals like parrots to collect this food and disperse it somewhere else. Same thing, the percentage of undamaged nuts, it's pretty low, but it's also pretty high depending which nuts we're talking about. So 44% with a pretty good sample size, but as bigger sample size we have, it's very likely that the percentage of damaged nuts, it's decreased, but it's still a pretty high percentage by these two species of macaw. So they clearly are dispersing a lot of undamaged nuts in the wild. Then we go to a parrot that it was massively traded for a long time. Burrowing parrots. A lot of you already saw burrowing parrots in captivities, and the group tried to understand how they were interacting with different food resources in the wild. That was a study done 2 years ago. You can see here a lot of ripe and unripe pods from Prosopis alba and Prosopis nigra, which is one of the main food resources they take in the wild. And the same thing, they if we separate from unripe pod exploitation and ripe pod exploitation, we can see that in both cases, what they mostly does is disperse seeds from partially consumed. That's very important because we already know that partially consumed seeds in some, at least on the studies that we use, also the lab component and study the germination success, we figure out that the germination success of partially consumed seeds is pretty high. So even without knowing specifically for these food resources, how good is the germination success, we can assume, and of course we need to study it, that the germination success is not going to be as bad as it was thought before all of those studies started to be public. Same thing, wasting. But you can see here that the wasting in unripe it was bigger on one species than in the other. There is a lot of data that we still don't understand. I also didn't participate directly in this study, so my understanding about the details of the study are limited compared to a co-author or an author of this study. But there is something that we can clearly extract from this study to understand how parrots eat the food resources in the wild. Then we keep looking about how parrots disperse, and we found out that parrots carry on a lot of seeds on their bill. And there is a lot of seeds, there's a lot of trees that they produce pulp that they get stuck on the bills pretty easy. And that's not casual. That needs to be something like an adaptation of those plants to be supported by bills, in this case by parrots, to be able to carry on those seeds somewhere else. So it's not about carry on seeds that you eat or in the bill. It's also that they get stuck in your bill. You don't have any intention to move them around, but because you're not going to clean your bill because a predator is going to come to the tree, or you just want to fly to another tree, and then you're going to be flying like these burrowing parrots, and you're going to be carrying on seeds on your bill. That's something that we studied almost all over the world. So this is pretty well studied already, the implication of epizoochory in parrots as a plant-animal mutualist. When we talk about mutualist, it's a double way benefit, in this case from plants and animals, from all those plants that parrots eat, and from all those parrot species that we study. So in terms of families, for us to understand the impact, and in terms of species, you can see there is massive amount of families and species involved, which means that parrots are not only doing that for a specific group of plants, they're doing that for a lot of different plant species, and that's increased their ecological role, dispersing seeds of all these plant species and family species in the wild. Same thing when we go about interactions between parrot species and food plants. Most of parrot species interact with very few plant species, 2, 3. But we can see parrot species interacting with almost 28 parrot plant species on a mutualist way by epithocoria. And that's, again, brings the importance of the ecological role from all those different plant species. Same about distance, most dispersion distance, short, but some of them pretty long. And going back to palms, we were getting more and more in understanding, like deeply in understanding on how parrots interact with palms. And we realized that the way a palm is structured, it's not casual. It's really an adaptation to push a bird, or an animal to fly, to not to have a comfortable place to eat the food resource on the same tree. Because basically what every palm wants to do is to ensure that their fruits are going to be dispersed somewhere else, and those seeds are going to produce a new tree, so they can actually ensure the success of their species in nature. So if the palm is, if the branch of the palm is flexible, that means that the branch is not suitable for a bird that it's gonna use just one foot to eat the nut. Some birds, some animals can eat, they have hands, but birds, especially parrots, and we know already that parrots are the main group of dispersers for palms in the areas where they live. They use one foot. So if you are going to eat with one foot, the best thing for you is to go to a perching tree where you have a big branch that it's not moving a lot, and that's basically the perfect place for you to eat. If you are on a branch, on a palm, some of the palm branches are even like very flexible. So even with the weight of a macaw, the palms like go down, 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 and there is no way a macaw is going to eat the food there. So palms and macaws, we were trying to understand the distribution between palms and parrots in the wild. And we found out that most palm species are distributed on South Asia and Latin America. And that's basically where most parrot species are located. There are very few parrot species in Africa. There's native, there was 1 or 2 in North America, none of them in Europe, and all about South Asia and Australia. That's where a lot of palm species are located. So most of the interactions we found out, especially in Latin America, that's where most data comes from, is that more interaction come from parrots that interact with native palms. That means there is a cultural knowledge of those parrot species to know how to interact with those food resources. And very few of them interact with invasive species that are not introduced, species. That's happened, for example, in Africa, where there are very few native species. Parrots are pushed to interact with more introduced species. So same thing, you can see here how palms are very important food resource for parrots in general in the wild. And the numbers of events, the dispersion distance, and we also trying to understand the fruit size compared to the parrot size. So there is a clear relation between the body size of parrots and the palm fruit size they eat. If you are a small parrot, you mostly are going to be feeding on palm fruits that are smaller, because that's what you can move on. So basically, what palms are doing, it's kind of deciding which type of parrots, in this case, they want to use as the main dispersers of their food resources. Same thing about native palms and introduced palms. We can see at the neotropic, there was a lot of species, a lot of interaction. And of course, seed predation is very important in parrots. We know that already, but also the dispersal, you can see it was very important on the studies, mostly with native palm species. And that's how the process works. You have the palm, you can see those flexible branches are not perfect for parrots to be eating on them. So they act as primary dispersers, they fly away, and then they drop those seeds, but also other species can collect them from the ground because the food wasting or accidental dropping, that they do also a lot of that because they're heavy animals, so they move around and the food starts to drop, and that's bring an opportunity for the secondary dispersers to take them and germinate. As longer is the distance from the trees that produce the food, as more likely the germination is gonna success. The germination rate it's higher. So just to finish all of this situation about what wild parrots eat in the wild and why, there is definitely the why. It's not because they don't eat nuts because they want to disperse them. The fact they disperse them, it's partially because they're the way they are as a species. So they are social animals, and this social structure makes them the perfect animals to disperse those type of food. So in terms of the diet they have, we know that there are some species that are pretty well studied, and definitely there are good food resources in captivity to feed a lot of different groups like macaws, like kakaroos, like Amazons, but there is a specific species that are pretty bad studied, and it's very likely that some of those species they need some specific food resources of nutrients in captivity that they use them in the wild, and like animal protein, that's more and more common found in studies that we do in the wild. And that means that that should be taken account when we try to understand what is the food that we should providing with our parrot. In terms of the relation they have with plants, we can see here a case where red-fronted macaws are using for nest a palm that is endemic from Bolivia, and it's critically endangered, like the macaw is critically endangered, and they occur only on a specific part of the country. So that means that it's very likely, we don't know yet, but it's very likely that this food is also an important food resource of those parrots in the wild, at least on this specific population that occurs on this palm, on this area where the palm occurs. But that means that there are a lot of things that we still don't know, but the extinction crisis, it's happening. And I hope it's not too late until we realize how important are those species and those populations of parrots in order to preserve those endangered species that they interact with. And another case that is pretty well known, which is the Puerto Rican parrot, It's a critically endangered species from Puerto Rico, endemic from Puerto Rico. And this species, it's been known the important role they have dispersing palm fruits from a specific palm that it's native from the island. So the same thing, if we lost the macaw, we will lose this mutualism relation forever, and that's gonna have a massive impact on the palm as an species as well. So that was my presentation. I hope it was very interesting for all of you. I just tried to bring which were the most recent studied about what wild parrots eat. You can see they eat a lot of different food items from the wild. It's pretty hard to tell you specifically by species which of those food resources are more important for them. We know for a lot of species, but not clearly for not all of them. But what we already know, and it's very important to understand and to respect, is that the way they waste food, it's clearly an ecological role they have. So please understand your parrot. Your parrot will do it forever. That's part of the nature as a species. And secondly, that they need to be preserved, just not because they are pretty and because we all fall in love with them in different ways. It's because they are critical for the ecosystem where they exist. So thank you very much for being here, listening to me. It's been a very proud situation and a scenario for me to show all this data and studies. And I'm just very much looking forward to hear if you have any question and keep talking about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jose. That's you gave us so much to think about and to talk about. And I think Dr. Susan Orez is about to join us as well, which will make for.
Hi, Jose.
Hi, Susan.
Yes. So, so many questions. I wanted to start with just a basic definition. You know, in captivity, the word seed is not always a positive thing. So how we define seed for what birds eat in the wild versus what birds eat in captivity is completely different. You know, manufactured seed is considered very unhealthy. So how do you define seed, Jose? Is it legumes and nuts and pods, etc.?
Yeah. Basically, seed is the part of the fruit that has the germination capability. Basically, everything else that it's not the part that the fruit is gonna use to generate a new plant. So the pulp, etc. We consider that another food item that it's provided. Some trees, like palms, they give for some parrots what they can provide is the pulp. So parrots eat them, but other species they can crush the shell and they can access to the nut. So the nut, it's something that plants protect a lot, because that's where the new plants will come. So that's why they produce, in case of palms, they produce a big shell. And the fact that parrots can actually predate the most important part of the fruit for the palm, but they also do it on a way that they don't impact the germination success, that says a lot about their ecological role. It's like they're saying to the palm, sorry, palm, I'm gonna take what you really take care most about, but don't worry, because your seed is gonna keep germinating. And that's something we were not gonna expecting at all to happen. And that's what clearly the studies are showing.
Well, speaking of content and nutrition, and you know, again, seed in captivity is not considered nutritious if you go to the store and buy that packaged seed, so to speak. But since you mentioned that almost all parrots seem to thrive on some kind of palm nut or palm tree or palm flower. Do we have any sense of what the content of that is in terms of omega-3, 6, calcium, protein, et cetera?
Yeah, in general, we can say that pulps produce energy. So it's full of carbohydrates. So it's just fast energy that every animal needs. And nut produce fat, which is also a very important part of parrot diet, especially in macaws. We know that fat percentage on their diet should be higher. Same for cockatoos, but for birds like Amazons, that they don't have a bill to crack nuts, so they don't access to the fatty food items that the trees produce. They should not have this big percentage of fat on their diet. Their diet should be most for carbohydrates. But that's the thing. Amazons get fat pretty easy in captivity because they don't exercise like they do in the wild. So diet of Amazons in the wild, it's full of carbohydrates, but they are flying the whole day. They're so sensible. If they see a human, they very rare stay close. As soon as they hear something, they fly away. And that means you need energy. So when you need energy, it's carbohydrates. But macaws, they can go to the carbohydrates, but they need the fat, especially good fat, which is the fat that is provided by the nuts of the palms. And that's where some people say, well, my Amazon is getting fat in captivity. Well, it's getting fat because it's not getting enough energy and it's getting a lot of carbohydrates. So that's where we need to adapt also the diet, like we do for humans in our captive birds, being reasonable about the actual exercise of our parrots are doing in captivity.
So based on what you know about how the wild parrots are eating versus what our captive birds don't do much of, which is exercise, how does all that translate for the people listening in relative to their birds at home? Any advice?
So Susan,
we know the veterinarians know.
Well, no, I don't know that we like Jose's saying, we're all learning, right? And the problem is you're all trying to get him to tell you how, based on what he sees them doing in the wild, what my bird at home in a cage who's sitting there should eat. He can't do that because you have this bird that's sitting on its butt, and it's like the Amazon that should be flying 8 hours a day. It's not doing that, right? And so the food that bird is selecting for in the wild is based on his daily energy expenditures and his maintenance requirements, and then his breeding and all of those things. But what it shows us is that so, and also the other thing that you didn't bring up, Anne, is when a bird is eating something in captivity, this was a study done a long time ago, in a half an hour, they can eat all of their energy requirements in a day in captivity. So because they're going to get full after a period of time, you have to package the food requirements more concentrated, because they have to get those amino acid requirements and those types of things in a smaller amount. Where Jose's talking to us about birds that are moving around all day long. So that amount of protein and the amount of fat is being distributed over more of a whole day length than the parrot. But the thing that you can do, what you're really getting to is from a behavioral perspective, not from a nutritional perspective, but from a behavioral perspective, what can I do so that my bird can mimic some of those behaviors that it would do in the wild? Jose, would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think definitely it's hard to compare. We're talking about two different worlds. We're talking about a wild bird. So for example, something that it's important to understand is that I don't remember seeing a bird in the wild eating like a lot once. They don't do that. They eat 2 fruits and then they fly. So basically they are the whole day, apart from the hottest time of the day, for most of parrots, they just rest, but they eat a lot in different times. So this idea of us like just giving the food to a parrot and try for them to eat as soon as possible so flies doesn't come, so they don't get started to feel like rodent and things like that. That's real life. Parrot need to have food available for a long time because that's what they do. Also, the things that it really impact me more is the waste. You know, I was concerned when I had my bluefin Amazon, when I started to be, you know, impacted by parrots. I had my bluefin Amazon captive bred in Spain. And I remember I was really concerned because she was wasting all the food I was providing to her. It's like, why she's doing that? And being able to study now in the wild, then you understand that it's a cultural thing they do. It's not that they just want to get to the bottom of the feeder to collect a specific food they want. Sometimes they do it. We know that. We know that the good food, that like the food they like, put it at the top, because if not, they're going to throw everything. But also it's part of their behavior as a group. And if you have a lot of parrots on a feeder, on a cage, that's also going to happen. Something I'm also really concerned is about parrots, that most of the food, it's pellets. Pellets, it's an incredibly boring food item for parrots. All has the same shape, same colors. Imagine ourselves, intelligent animals, eating pellets forever. So I'm not saying that pellets are bad. Pellets are, for a lot of species, they are a great way to balance parrot diet on a good way, but we should provide to them a lot of different food items in order for them to be able to waste them, to interact with different shapes, different colors, different size. And that's what's gonna maintenance our bird healthy, not on a physical way, but on a mental way, which is a very important thing we should care about when we have parrots in captivity. So, you know, for me, this is pretty like boom, you know, even when I keep thinking about it today, when I was refreshing the presentation, new ideas, new things comes to my mind because you keep reflecting all of this data. But what I can say, and I agree with some comments here on the chat, is that what we know already about parrots is far away more than what we knew 20, 30 years ago. And there is no reason for us as a keepers of parrots in captivity to be following the old school ideas about what parrots should eat in captivity. We should all have a very, we should all read in some way this information and be able to transmit that to the way we are taking care of our parrots in captivity.
Yeah, which is why some of our questions, because we want people who are listening who are not scientists, not conservationists, not studying birds in the wild, to understand how to relate to what you said today. And I'm curious, have you seen birds in the wild eating animal protein, insects, etc.?
Yeah.
And would you say that's endemic to most species, or?
Well, I think, unfortunately, I think this is a behavior that most of us as researchers, we don't document, because we sometimes when you collect data in the wild, you want, so even if you don't want, you're kind of affecting the data that you are collecting by what you assume is going to happen. So if you see a parrot like destroying a leaf, you maybe think, well, it's a parrot destroying a leaf, you know, because parrots like to destroy things. Well, in the wild, animals do something because there is a reason. This is the wild. This is not like I'm gonna destroy a tree. And when I stop looking this behavior as a destroying behavior. And I went down the streets. I saw, for example, that some cliff parakeets were eating insects that were affecting the plants. So actually, the parakeets were supporting the plant to survive because the plant has such amount of insects attacking the plant that if those insects could doing their work, it's very likely this individual was going to die. So that's another point. That's where parrots kind of interact with plants as a gardeners of the habitat where they are. So animal protein, I can tell you, from macaws to small parakeets, is an important part of their diet. Even if it's tiny compared to pulp or to nuts, that doesn't mean the tiny food resources are not important. They are also crucial to them. So I think some people like to give them like chicken bones to their parrot, not very often, like boil bones. I don't know how many bones you should give to a parrot. I don't think everybody knows that. But what I can tell you is that every like once a month or something like that, it should not generate anything bad. It's an enrichment for your parrot, and you are giving some protein as well to the diet, which is, it looks like it's something important for them.
Do they eat other bird eggs? Have you seen that with parrots?
No. I saw monk parakeets eating carcass in Spain.
Wow.
That's another way to get animal protein, from meat, and the keys of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, Anne, Jose kept talking about, he would say fruits. I tend to call them fruiting bodies to distinguish them from the parrot owner who thinks he's talking about grapes and bananas. So, when he was talking about nuts, he was talking about them, or seeds, from a biological perspective. And the same is true with fruits, which are really a fruiting body. So,
say more about that, Susan, so people understand.
So, so when he's talking about that outer core of the palm, that's part of that fruiting body, part of that. Yeah. And so I remember having this, what I call the conversation with God, which is Dr. Claysing. And I was talking to him about different things that birds could eat as he's as a nutritionist, an avian nutritionist. And one of the things that I will never, ever forget, as I said, well, Dr. Claysing, what about bananas? And because owners like to give bananas, and he said, there's a long pause, and he said, well, Susan, from a nutritionist perspective, a banana is a yellow tube of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you couple that with a bird sitting on the perch, so I'm an advocate, Jose, as you know, of getting birds out and get lots of flapping flight or flying, because they were designed to be athletes, and in their heads, they're still thinking, I should be eating certain amount of fats and sugars, because that was what their body was designed to seek in order to fly. And now you sat them in a cage. So nutritionally, they're all out of whack because their bodies are out of whack, because we're not flying them enough, which would be really hard to do, honestly, but some is better than nothing. And we've seen that from a veterinary perspective as well. And I mean, you got to see these extremely amazing athletes doing what they're doing all day long, which is just exciting. So,
yeah, like bananas, for example, you don't see parrots eating banana in the wild. I never saw a parrot eating a banana in the wild. And even if they eat it, they spend a lot of energy every day. So that's fine. That's not going to be a massive problem to them. But I find interesting is that I saw people giving half banana to a macaw, which for the body size is like ourselves eating 8 bananas on a day. It's a massive amount of food for us. And it's very easy to eat. So that's correlated with the idea that they love it. Well, the fact that it's easy to eat, it's just easy to eat. They love it too, but it's too easy. They don't need to peel it. They don't need to do nothing with it. It just eat it. And at the same time, has a massive amount of sugar on it. So bananas are good. You can give it to a parrot, but it should be, in my opinion, it should be given as a treat in case they do something good, in case they are behaving properly, then you give it as a premium. But as a part of their diet, it's definitely not suitable. It's like if ourselves, we are sitting on a computer for all day and we are drinking juice and eating bananas the whole day, it's going to happen exactly the same. So there is a lot of common sense on feeding a parrot as well. It's not just science. It's also about understanding a little bit which is the nutrients that we are actually giving to our parrot. And that's need to be balanced to the exercise of our parrots have. So for example, the bluefin Amazon that I had when I was young, she's still alive. She's 20 years old. She's living with my mom. And my mom, she's living on an outside enclosure in the garden. She has a lot of space to fly. She's very fit, and she gets fixed fruits, which are really sugary, all days during winter. But in winter, this parrot has a massive loss of energy to keep heated because it's cold outside. So she actually needs the carbohydrates. And at the same time, she flies. So there's never going to be a perfect formula about how many bananas, how many different food items we should give to every parrot from a specific species, because it's all going to be related with how we take care of our parrot in terms of food energy waste, basically.
Another concept you touched on today, and I think is important, and I've noticed from my trips to the wild watching birds that they almost always hold the food in with their foot, which I think is very useful for people to take away today, to think about the foods they provide and how the bird gets that manipulation of their feet while they're eating. I mean, don't you see that they're almost always standing on one foot?
And it's a study that most of them are left-handed. Like, well, some people say that left-handed are more smart. I don't know parrots, but most of parrots are left-handed, at least in the wild. I don't know. Maybe that's a casualty, but I don't think so. There's something going on there.
I can tell you in captivity that when I look at parrots, they're more right-handed. They're right-footed. Because you can tell that their nails are more worn down on the right than the left.
When you say left-handed, Jose, do you mean they're standing on their right and eating with their left?
Yeah, exactly the same as Susan.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly the same. So, but the most important, it's well, both are important, but you need to balance your body. If you are 1,200 grams, you need to balance it in one foot. That's not easy, especially if you are on a palm. And that's another thing I think we can learn from today, is that if our parrot is wasting a lot of food, make sure that those parrots have access to a good perch. The perch need to be solid on the cage. It cannot move. If it moves a little bit, that's definitely going to affect to the food wasting. Secondly, if you have a flock of parrots, assume that your levels of wasting are going to be much higher than if you have a parrot alone. Some parrots in the wild, they just like to stolen food from others. They are lazy. They don't want to go to the food source and say, I don't want to fly. I'm going to wait until this guy comes to this perch. Then I stolen the food, and then he needs to go again. to the food source. And that's happening a lot in captivity. We also, when you have a flock, a lot of food waste below the feeder. That's another consequence of how they are. They are social animals, and they need to be social for their mental health. If you have the possibility to have different parrots interacting with your parrot, even if it's just if you have just one parrot, but even if it's just for a short period of time every week, do it. They are social animals like we are as humans. So that's another consequence of their social behavior, and something that I think we can take as a learning from this talk.
Somebody was asking about cactus, and I think we saw the red-fronted macaws in Bolivia standing on cactus and maybe eating it as well.
Yeah.
What do you know about cactus?
Do it. Yeah, I mean, there are cactus that we know that humans can consume them. I definitely think they can be given to parrots perfectly, but the same. It's like, it's like if we eat broccoli. Broccoli is good, for humans. But we cannot eat broccoli as the only thing forever. We're gonna die, It's the same thing. Cactus can be good for parrots because we saw them in the wild eating them and dispersing them. But that doesn't mean we just gonna give a cactus fruit every day, because this food is full of sugar for them. And that's not gonna help them. So there is a difference between being healthy compared to actually giving to your parrot the right amount of nutrition that you give to your parrot. A food can be healthy, like a banana. A banana is healthy. It's better than something that is being produced on a factory. But that doesn't mean that the nutrients are good if you give a lot of food. So I'm happy. I'm gonna leave my email, and I'm happy to have direct conversation with anybody who wants actually more information and would like my advice. That it's quite limited from the captive world. I think you, Anne and Sushan, and a lot of you girls are more expert on that. But yeah, to try to understand balanced diet a little bit, I think I can definitely help.
Do you see birds in the wild eating citrus?
Well, not
That was
really.
controversial for a while.
They don't eat citrus. They actually eat the seeds from the citrus. They don't eat the pulp. So, for example, blue-fern Amazons, that they are crop pests in Argentina, they basically open the orange to eat the seeds. They don't eat the pulp.
Interesting. Yeah, we know they eat a lot of what we think of as toxic foods, and with no problem. But like you said, they've discovered, Don Brightsmith especially, that the clay was not for, balancing out the toxins. It was more for the sodium. Yeah. So what else do we know about the mineral? Because almost all birds, all parrots at least, eat dirt in the wild. Do we know anything more about the content of the soil and what that might mean for birds in general?
No, not really. We just know this about 20 species from the Peruvian Amazon. And to be honest, I don't know. I never saw, those clay leaks blocks that you can buy in captivity to put in your parrot. I don't know what they have. I maybe prefer to not know what they have.
Yeah.
And also, like the fact that you put a clay, I saw people putting those blocks. Parrots just destroy them because it's funny. They don't eat anything of it. And I think it's important to understand that they just eat clay to get sodium. They don't eat clay because they like the clay. It's a source to obtain sodium, because sodium in the forest, and especially in the jungle, is very difficult to obtain. So animals need to obtain sodium by eating plant parts or clay. So that means that, I don't know, but I'm sure in captivity there are plants and there are food that they provide sodium naturally, and that's mean that by giving that to your parrot and by making sure that your parrot eat it, very likely you are already providing good amount of sodium for them. You don't need to buy the clay for the sodium. Maybe you buy the clay because you want for your parrot to have fun destroying it, but that doesn't mean that they actually are going to obtain
Not
the
for
salt.
nutrition, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, Jose is actually in Costa Rica right now, where he is a very important member and staff person for the Macaw Recovery Network. And we were just in Costa Rica too, some of us, and where we learned that the food was completely different between breeding season and non-breeding season. How do you think some of that information might be helpful to people with birds in their home? What do you see as the distinct differences?
Well, it's known already from wild birds that when breeding season start, they get more fat mostly and more carbohydrates, more fat in the case of macaws, for example. That's normally related with the fact that, they actually need to feed babies. So if you need to feed babies, you need to take more food resources, and you have more energy cost in terms of flying more and obtaining more food. But it's what I saw is that parrots during the non-breeding season, they tend to have like a more normal diet, like a just maintenance diet, like just keeping alive and moving around. But when it start the breeding time, that's where parrots start to like be more crazy in terms of eating more fat, eating more carbohydrates, or more amount, and that's kind of accelerate their breeding behavior. And that's something that it's happened in captivity. I know a lot of breeders that they supplement with more fat and more carbohydrate parrots, and that makes the parrots drive crazy and start breeding more.
So if people with birds in captivity are trying to keep that hormonal behavior to a minimum, less fat would be one start, right?
Yeah,
Just
and
saying
less
it for the record
carbohydrate
here. Yeah.
Yeah, just like things that food that doesn't get you excited. It's known in humans as well that people that are addict to carbohydrates, like we normally, most of us, we are addict. When we don't have carbohydrates, we're kind of crazy. We just feel like nervous. We need those. We need the drug. We need the carbohydrates, and that's happened too. I mean, if you use your parrot to eat a lot of fiber, like right amount of carbohydrates, right amount of fat, most likely your parrot is going to be healthier, and most likely your parrot is going to be quiet. It's not going to be like crazy and doing different behaviors that are not normal. But I don't think we really know a lot about that, especially in captivity, and that will be, I think, a good way to understand better parrot behavior. I think a lot of ways to understand parrot behavior, it's mostly we're trying to understand in captivity because the way we interact with them, I think there is a massive importance on the food we provide to them, that they actually cause part of the behavior or parrot have. It happened with childs. It's also studied that sugar on childs when they are young, that affect massively their capacity to interact with other childs. And that's humans. Why not? It's happening the same with parrots. If parrots are so intelligent and they're social like we are. So I think food definitely has a very important component on how our parrots interact with ourselves, but with other parrots as well.
Have you seen parrots eating grains in the wild? Like, do parrots in, say, Peru eat quinoa?
No. Well, there's just one reason. Quinoa doesn't grow where they occur. Quinoa is a grass. Some species from the altiplane maybe use it, but it's not native. I mean, it's native from the area, but it's not native from like a plant that you can find in the forest in a good amount. So I'm not saying it's bad, because at the end, in captivity, we need to find food resources that provide good nutrition to our parrots, because the natural diet is going to be almost impossible to replicate. So I assume that quinoa is boiled quinoa. It's good for parrots. It's good protein source for parrots, but yeah, not in the wild.
Yeah, I wanted to answer Jim's question about eating it raw versus cooked. Just that we do cook it or sprout it even, so, but not
Mhm.
raw. Yeah.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to learn more about what parrots eat in the wild, what kind of references would you give them?
Well, I'm more than happy sharing with them papers, but one of the things that I realize now, I know it's not too late, but it's kind of the things that you keep thinking about, is the fact that I think we already have enough information, science-based, to develop a good parrot book. I think that should be a very important project we should think about, to kind of makes normal people to understand the consequence of the science that we already know about how parrots eat and why, in order to impact in a good way captive parrots' life. So I think that that's something I would like we can talk more about and involve Phoenix Landing Foundation in it, which is doing an amazing work with parrots, not just in captivity, also supporting conservation in the wild. And in the meantime, because projects takes time, especially things like that, I'm more than happy to share what I know and my thoughts with anybody. I'm just gonna write again my email, put it on the screenshot, but yeah, if somebody want to talk with me about that, I'm more than happy to talk with them and help as much as I can. And if somebody also is interested to support those endangered parrots in the wild, I'm more than happy to help them understand the type of project they are searching for, and good projects and good people, that there are a lot of them around, that they need help to make those fabulous animals to keep thriving in the wild.
Yes, hopefully everybody is doing something to help conservation and parrots in the wild, because like we say, it's the parrot people who have to care about the parrots. So please do something. Even a little bit of something helps and goes a long way. So, well, Jose, you are fabulous, smart, wise, wonderful person. So glad to know you. Hope we have a long lasting, friendship, and can work together to help birds far and wide in many ways in the future. And we appreciate everybody being here today. And like Jose said, he's very approachable and very willing to share his love and knowledge of birds, which we need all of that we can get in the world right now. So thanks again to everyone for being here today and spending time. I'm sorry we lost Dr. O. She'll probably be trying to come back once we're gone, but I'm glad she could join us as well. Oh, there you are. You have any closing thoughts?
Here, but I'm eating my lunch.
Oh, no eating allowed. Yeah.
But I'm not eating banana, by the way. But I think Jose's got some good ideas. Well, amazing stuff. Actually amazing. And I think if we kind of collect some of it, it would be really very good for parrot owners. And as you said, Anna, he's the guy out there with boots in the field. And if parrot owners don't take his message, there won't be any in the wild. And he's telling us that they're very, very important, even for farmers who in the past, looked at them negatively, but in fact, they should be looking at them very positively. So it's a clash of cultures between farmers and wildlife typically. But I think it's something that's very important that we try to get out there. And Jose, thank you for all of your work.
Well, thank you. Thank you also for your work. Your work is so important as well. So yeah, let's keep working together to make a difference for parrot conservation and for parrots in captivity as well, because they deserve all our attention.
They do. They do. Thank you, Jose. We love you. We appreciate you, and hope that you will join us again in the future. Your time is very valuable, and we've We're really grateful for you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody who attended. And I really hope we can keep in touch and yeah, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. See you next month, April
you.
22nd, Dr. Richie Bordeaux. We're going to talk about feather destructive behavior. I forgot to mention that again, but that should be feather health is another very important topic, and we hope you'll come back. Thanks again. Bye.